but host has disabled. Okay. It says the host has disabled participant screen sharing. Have I gotten through the participant ID? Is that why? Renata Dana, you have to speak to Habibi and your technical support, because it says host has disabled my screen sharing. So I think it's my mistake. I have gotten through the link that Habibi you sent, the last link you sent. Should I get in from some other link?
Can you try now, Professor? Because I already enabled it.
Recording in progress.
Okay, great. Is that visible?
Yes, it's visible, Professor.
So really, this is a tall order. What Habibi has given me in 6 lectures, we have to complete the whole thing. So I'm trying to, look at global political economy. We're trying to look at instances here. And having said that, it's just the tip of the iceberg. But then this is a bachelor's level class, so which is fine. It gives you an idea. I will also share some more readings with you today. And ideally, we are looking at it from the perspective of, from various schools of thought. So any opinion that is coming in here, please take it as a given. And you don't have to accept it. Please be critical on whatever we are taking up. So very quickly, today's theme, of course, is multinational corporations, transnational corporations, responsible development, new technologies. And I'm only going to touch on Washington Consensus because the next time we are going to, even just the theory of all of this is taking very long. So I'm just going to, kind of touch on Washington Consensus because the next time we are going to deconstruct that further for the International Financial Institutions session that we are going to have. So hopefully this is going to work in a way that, you would have questions by then, and I'll also share links with you. So very quickly, placing, what we are doing in the background of the course of political economy, which is really placing the political and economic in perspective, giving this causal relationship between the state and the market, with the civil society as the third part of the triad. And as we did in the first few lectures, the post-colonial state managed the development model, state as a rational actor for the benefit of the entire society, and an interventionist state, a welfare stated state, which has, of course, now changed. And that consensus has given way, consensus that was there in the way these were being looked at, has given way to liberalization, which, of course, is not something which has been taken up by especially the developing countries. Should I go slower? Renata Dana, tell me that, because then somebody will tell me after half an hour, please tell me now. I think I should go slower, but this is the background I'm doing. Tell me.
I think a little bit slower, Miss.
Okay.
Will be great. Thank you very much.
So we are looking at liberalization, which was not something, it was a bitter pill, as they say, which had to be swallowed. And the whole notion This is amazing. Sorry, the alarm is not getting off. I had to switch off the phone. So when liberalization was introduced, it was not introduced in the developing world. It was not a very welcome thing, naturally, and we are going to deconstruct that, naturally, because it meant changes that the countries had to make in their welfare status policies, which would impact their vote bank. So that's a background in which we are looking at it. And historically, the broad ideologies that we did the last time as perspectives of political economy were broadly, within this fits in most of them, is liberalism, economic nationalism, Marxism. And there's a kind of a conflict in these, but the predominant frame in which we are looking at this, the three ideologies, range from a whole lot of perspectives that we are looking at, where, when Gilpin, who has really done a lot of work, and I've shared his book as well, who's worked on global political economy and has, developed that whole concept, which is not to say it is a new concept. He believes that liberalism reiterated the world that we live in is best described by ideas of economic nationalism and those of Marxism. Even though he's a liberal, he's stating that you cannot ignore economic nationalism or Marxism. And relevant to all these three perspectives, of course, is the notion of this triad of state, society, and the market. State being the political entity, society being the social entity, and market the economic one. So the three ideologies might differ on a range of questions, on the question of whether the market is significant for economic growth and distribution of wealth among groups and societies. They also differ in the role of the state in the organization of domestic and international society. And the three ideologies, thirdly, also differ on the impact that the market system has on the issue of war and peace. And I'm going to do a little bit later on market society versus market economy of Michael Sandel. And I will also share his latest book with you. So we will look at those perspectives. And essentially, the whole notion of the three ideologies that we did the last time was really looking at the nationalist perspective, which is essentially building on the doctrine of state building. And the idea behind that is that markets should be subordinate to the pursuit of state interest. And that means that the political factors should determine the national interest. The nationalist perspective advocates, in other words, the primacy of politics over economics. And then, of course, you have economic nationalism, which has metamorphized over the years from mercantilism to statism to protectionism, protectionist ideas. And the central idea of primacy of the state, the military power, the national security in the organization and functioning of the international system remains with this. Liberalism, of course, assumes that the market economy exhibits a very powerful tendency towards an equilibrium and the inherent stability over a long period of time. They feel this is the solution. And of course, you have the Marxist critique. I'm just doing a quick recap on what we did. That although the individual capitalism is rational, as the liberals assume it is, the capitalist system itself is irrational. So this is the Marxist critique. Marxist critique also extends to the fact that the competitive market necessarily requires that the individual capitalist must save, invest, and accumulate. And he's saying this is, of course, the extension of this is how it leads to other areas and concerns like creation of a class system where you have the bourgeoisie and the proletariat and who are exploiting, and all his notions of surplus value and other things. But that is a general kind of a theoretical perspective, because Marx has naturally spoken about political economy. In fact, as I've already told you, political economy as a perspective is very old. It's not recent. We are only looking at it from the recent perspective, from liberalization, post-liberalization or post-economic liberalization. So historically, even though these might have existed, it is Cold War alliances and structures which provide the framework of how we are looking at international politics and global political economy today. It was security concerns and alliances which provided like a political glue to the changes that were needed. And with the end of the Cold War, American leadership and close capitalist powers cooperation was really declining. So, you saw the decline of the NATO, the Warsaw kind of element that came in. Simultaneously, the market-oriented world grew much larger with developing countries' participation. It was something which was a constant. So throughout most of the latter half of the 20th century, the Cold War and its alliance structures provided the framework within which the world economy was really functioning. United States and its major allies generally subordinated potential economic conflicts to the need to maintain political and security cooperation. The emphasis here was on security interests and alliances cohesion, which provided the political glue, as we said, and held this world political economy together and facilitated compromises, a lot of negotiations of important national differences over economic issues. So with the end of the Cold War, American leadership and the close economic cooperation with the capitalist powers really declined, and simultaneously you had the market-oriented growth, which was larger than life, and the formerly communist countries and the developing ones became more willing, I'm saying that in a questioning way, became more willing to participate in the market system. Because, as I've already done with you, there was the TINA factor, which is there was no alternative that the developing world had. They had to take up what was being offered. And we'll do more on that when we do the international financial institutions. This was exemplified by the much more active role taken by the less developed countries in the World Trade Organization, in GATT actually. At that point, it was GATT that was, coming into being. So economic liberalization has entailed a few key developments in trade, finance, foreign direct investment by the multinational corporations. So the backdrop in which they have evolved has been post-Cold War, and international trade has grown more rapidly than the global economic output. Sorry, somebody saying something? Then you have merchandise trade in goods and in services. Services is something which has come up later. Banking, information, now IIT has a lot of significance today. And, with the decreasing cost of transportation, the goods are becoming more tradable. In fact, with artificial intelligence, we are looking at almost a zero cost there, in which way that the cooperation could happen. So there is an increased kind of a international competition. So with this, for a strong, and I would suggest, and I'm going to send you that reading also, for a strong attack on globalization, which is what it has been for the contemporary globalization and its alleged kind of negative dimensions, please look at Richard Falk. I will share that reading with you. It's called Predatory Globalization. It's an Oxford University Press 1999 publication. And it's a very, if you want to look at the other side, please do look at that. Trade, international trade has grown more rapidly than the global economic output. So in addition to all of these, there's been an increasing cost of what we spoke about as tradables with the immense expansion of the world trade. So international competition has increased. I'm not talking about cooperation just now, but competition has increased. All the consumers and export sectors within individual countries, within individual nation states, have benefited from the increased kind of openness which it has entailed. Many businesses find themselves competing against foreign firms that have improved their efficiency. So if you have competition from outside, even the local firms become better. And in the 1980s and 1990s, trade competition has become even more intense, as a growing number of kind of industrialized economies in East Asia and elsewhere shifted from an import substitution to an export-led growth strategy. So overall, the major competitors for almost all American firms, for instance, remained American firms. So you didn't really have that kind of a change. So we are talking about an expansion of global trade. Underlying the expansion of the global trade have been a number of developments. And since World War II, and if we go back to post-war scenario, trade barriers have declined significantly due to successive rounds of trade negotiations that have taken place, which we will do a bit when we do WTO, when we do GATT and WTO. And during this last half of the 20th century, the tariff levels of even United States and other industrialized countries have dropped, from about 40% to less than 10%. Some say 6%, but let's put it as less than 10%. And barriers to trade and services have also been lowered. So with the barriers gone, the openness or the laissez-faire has come up in a big way. Additionally, 1970s saw a deregulation and privatization, which further opened up the national economies to imports. So technological advances in communication, transportation reduces cost, it goes without saying, and thus significantly encouraged a kind of a trade expansion. It boomed. And taking advantage of these economic and technological changes, we had more and more businesses have participated in international markets. So despite these developments, most trade takes place among the developed countries. I mean, we are talking about it as if, the whole world is involved in its global economy. But initially it was the US, Western Europe, and basically Japan, plus a few emerging markets like in East Asia, some in Latin America and elsewhere. Most of the less developed world was excluded from it. Certainly Indonesia, certainly India at that point in time, except as exporters of food and raw materials. So in fact, where Africa is concerned, Africa south of Sahara is concerned, for example, only accounted for 1% of the total world trade in the 1990s. That is how bad the situation was. So there was a need for a financial revolution. And essentially, what was this financial revolution? It was linked to national economies, much more closely became linked to each other. It increased the capital available for developing countries, as many of these financial flows are short-term, highly volatile, and speculative, as we've written here. International finance has become the most unstable aspect of global capitalist economy. The immense scale of and the velocity, the speed, and the speculative nature of the financial movement across the national borders has actually made governments more vulnerable to sudden shifts in movements. So governments become more vulnerable because they are now exposed to a global economy. Governments can therefore, fall prey to currency speculators, as happened in 1992 European financial crisis, which actually caused Great Britain, to withdraw from the European exchange rate mechanism. And in 1994, 1995, punishing collapse of the peso, the Mexican peso, as well as in the devastating East Asian financial crisis in the late 1990s. So whereas we have some financial globalization exemplifies healthy and beneficial kind of triumph of global capitalism, for others, it has been a very disturbing trend. For others, the international financial system is quote unquote out of control, as they say, and must be better regulated. Either way, international finance is one area where the term globalization is most appropriately applied, because it's truly globalization which has, opened up a whole system of change that comes in. So here we're looking at multinational corporations, which was not a new phenomena at that point in time. But nonetheless, post-war and post-Cold War specifically, when we look at these transnational and multinational corporation, it was a new phenomena, of course, later called neo-colonial as well. So what are TNCs or MNCs? They are business organizations that have roots in one country, but myriad operations in another country. These are a cluster of corporations of diverse nationalities joining together by ties of common ownership, and they're responsive to a common management strategy. You know, on the face of it, it looks very politically neutral, but as we deconstruct it, we see how entrenched it is. An MNC, quote unquote, owns and manages businesses in 2 or more countries. It is an agency of direct as opposed to portfolio investment in foreign countries, holding and managing the underlying physical assets rather than securities based upon these assets. Multinational firms that seek to integrate extensively into each national community in which activities are carried on, and on the international corporation front, you know, where each where the function of an integrated world economic unit becomes something which is subject to question. So Charles Kindleberger has done a lot of work on it, and his definition really was that integrated international corporations that truly function as integrated world economic units are MNCs. So this is almost eulogizing the MNCs, that these are the mechanisms through which the global economy was woven together. So what are the main characteristics of multinational corporations? Essentially, they're large, usually have several billions of dollars in sales. They have numerous affiliates in many countries, and most of their business inside the developing countries. Now, it's questionable why only the developing countries, but mostly it's so. They are, of course, perceived both as a potential and a real threat to purely national companies, because these become competitions which come in. They're also, you know, you use a host of other ways and mechanisms through which they are really seductive and reach out to the public, which probably the local ones can't. But the fact that they come to the local countries and they are within that countries, they are actually using, quote unquote, misusing, abusing, you know, the system as well, and the local kind of attitudes. So as I said, perceived both as a threat and as a potential to the labor force of the home countries, to the labor force of the host countries, because the host countries feel that, you know, we have an employment issue, why can't they be taken up? But it's cheaper for the MNCs to employ the home countries ones, because that means that they can do it at a cheaper rate. And of course, they are perceived as a threat, both as a potential and a real threat to the international economic order. So what are the variations that are there? There are tremendous variations in structures and operation of multinational corporations all over. It's not a uniform category that we are speaking about, which really, you know, is dealing with questions that we need to understand, that, you know, it's a uniform category. They are maintaining, they have certain policies, they have certain rules that are drawn out, that this is what they have only some basic commonalities, which are manifest in terms of the kind of management. Despite all the variations in the nature of the multinational corporations all over the world, there is a management that each has. There is an ownership syndrome, of course, different in different MNCs, but ownership, this is a pattern that you see in multinational. They are financing, they are resourcing, they are manufacturing, and they're also marketing. So when we say these are neo-colonial forces, we're really looking at how markets for, you know, when we spoke about colonialism was using the colonized countries as markets from which they bought the raw materials and markets to which it sold the manufactured material. And that was considered like, these are policies which are detrimental. Multinational corporations did that in a more subtle, more insidious, more debilitating way in, in the way the operations took place. And the growth of, so when we are looking at multinational corporations, the growth of the multinational corporations really begins with international trade for them, where there's exchange of goods among nations. So, on the face of it, it's very innocuous. It is not something that we are taking over like the colonization did. It's very insidious and it's very latent. The next stage is when they start portfolio investment with partial exchange of physical corporate assets of one company for the capital assets of another portfolio of another company, which is portfolio investment. Slowly, they are, increasing their interventionist designs, so to say, for their own benefit. The third stage is the most worrying because you have FDIs which come into being, foreign direct investments. The third stage evolves with the acquisition of the entire company or the establishment of productive facilities owned and managed by a firm with economic interests in more than one country. So you're creating your niche areas in what were earlier colonies in these developing nations. So since basically when we look at the way the growth has happened since the mid 1970s, financial deregulation and the creation of a new financial instruments, such as and such kind of derivatives that you have, and most importantly, technological advances in communication have contributed to a much more highly integrated international financial system. It's obvious that international finance has a profound impact on global economy. So when you have direct foreign direct investments, it is directly impacting both sides of the coin and detrimentally the ones where the investment happens. Whereas for some, financial globalization exemplifies healthy and beneficial triumph of global capitalism. For others, the international financial system, as we say, and we, look at this at another point as well, is completely out of control. And this really needs to be monitored and you need to negotiate on it. Either way, the international finance is one area in which the term globalization becomes something which is insidiously or otherwise used. And the use of the term globalization has also come into popular usage in, with the surge of foreign direct investment. MNCs and FDIs have been around for several centuries in the form of East India Company, for instance, and other merchant adventurers. But the way the MNCs have taken this over is completely a different ball game. So why do MNCs kind of invest abroad? I mean, what is their reasoning for investing abroad? So MNCs kind of make foreign investment get behind tariff and non-tariff kind of barriers, which makes it impossible, for them to serve a foreign market from outside, which means they have to enter the market. They have to come within the confines of the market. These barriers kind of combined with the rate of domestic inflation and high transportation cost, seem to be a major incentive for a lot of MNCs. Certainly the US-based FDIs, especially in the European Economic Community, was because of that, because the communication barriers were so much. So for example, a US pharmaceutical company firm must produce in France or lose the French market. It has to be within there because the transportation and other costs did not make it worth their while to actually do that. And since the pharmaceutical standards are regulated in France through, I'm just taking an example, through periodic inspection of, the production process. So it had to be within there. You couldn't have quality control and product, inspection happening in another country when they were doing. Also, labor was cheaper. It becomes cheaper because, your transportation costs are low. So this method really of providing a kind of a consumer protection has resulted in a virtual embargo on the importation of pharmaceuticals into France. So you have the first, point that we've raised here about the investment is to really get behind the tariff and non-tariff barriers. Then secondly, many companies view international investment as a means of serving foreign market effectively and more efficiently than could be done through any kind of exportation. So export is a no-no because of apart from the cost, the other factors. So in addition to transportation and time saving, one of the main advantages of being close to the market being served is that the company can get a better feel of the market. So this may enable them to, tailor make their products to the purchasing needs or patterns or customs of the local market. So, for instance, you would have in India, you would have a McDonald's selling, burgers which are vegetarian with some flavors in it, like tikkas, or even Pizza Hut and pizza outlets, which are marketing from outside, will make a tandoori chicken flavor, which is completely not the product itself, but this is to seduce the local markets within. Even in terms of products, other consumables that you have, all these is to get a better feel of the market, and that really works to make their product work in that sense of the term. So you have outlets which have opened out, which are burger, instead of Burger King, you have Burger Sing here, which is really, trying to catch on the market to say that, okay, this is a burger, but it's really, something that we are familiar with because this is a Singh who's making it. Singh, which is a surname of a lot of Sardars that are here, the Sikh community. So in this way, the sales increase over and above that would have been possible from export. So, you're really dealing with changes that you anticipate and exponential changes and returns by getting a better feel of the market, which is what the MNCs do. Then direct foreign investment may be a part of a defensive strategy to diversify and protect the firms from risks and uncertainties of the domestic business. Cycles, of strikes, threats, sources of supply. So you can tap on it, and this becomes something which is a useful tool. And considerable kind of foreign direct investment is made by MNCs in response to kind of increased foreign competition that exists. And to meet this competition, a company may also follow thy competitor kind of an ideology, a strategy that follow your competitor into the local market. So if you can't do it, otherwise you follow them and then you better because your technology is there. So technology plays a very, very clear role in something like this. And then you, of course, have, for instance, there were times where the challenge of the Japanese products and increasingly largely sophisticated European products, this motivation was particularly strong. So service companies really often invested abroad for defensive reasons because of their competitors had done so. It was a competition from within. This is particularly true when we talk about it of banks, of insurance companies, of management consulting firms, as well as manufacturing firms who came into being. So the whole notion of to continue with why do they invest is another motivation, of course, of direct investment abroad is reduction of the transportation and the production costs. Many firms really in the extracting industry, for instance, are finding that given the rapidly, rising cost of transportation, it is cheaper to process raw material on the site itself and ship the processed kind of high value product than it is to ship the relatively low value unprocessed raw material. So initially, you had the shift that was happening was that instead of producing abroad, you were coming here and producing and charging them for it. And because you were so competitive and technology was on your side, you could make a lot of profit on that. Many MNCs with licenses abroad found, that they could take better advantage of their technological, advancement that they had in the manufacturing sector rather than licensing. So often licenses are limited to their ability to raise capital, to expand their facilities, and to take advantage of the expanding markets. Further, you had, by operating abroad, an MNC can better monitor, technical innovations of other countries. You couldn't do it sitting somewhere else. It was not possible. Then you had many firms are attracted to invest abroad by foreign investments, like because of tax holidays that they might get, unlimited remittances that they have, 100% foreign ownership, duty-free kind of import that was taking place of much needed materials and machinery. So although these incentives are often pointed to a very very disdainfully by groups which oppose the multinational corporations, it demonstrates that the importance that is given, which certain foreign countries attach to, attracting foreign investment. So even though we might be disdainful for it, we all want to attract that kind of foreign investment. Why do they invest abroad? Another very, very significant reason is to protect foreign investment that they've already made. Many MNCs are forced to continue to invest abroad in order to protect the value of the capital already that they have invested, already employed. In other words, unless there's a continuous flow of foreign investment funds, the existing kind of stock of capital would run down. So jeopardizing the value and competitiveness of the whole foreign investment becomes a very, very significant reason why, they are actually making these investments. Now, there's certain academic theories which concerning this whole notion of, MNC's decision to invest. And basically these can be put into three categories again: financial theories, life cycle theories, and market imperfection theories, in the way we can see why that investment takes place. And the financial theory really is, very, very systematic theory of international investment, or which are more or less straightforward extension of financial theories that are used to justify a kind of a domestic investment. The basic principles that governs domestic investment decision is maximization of the worth of an asset. Any kind of a business, that's the proposition. So it is this worth of an asset is equal to the present value of all the future cash flows associated with that asset, discounted at a rate that reflects the riskiness, how your risk of such flows. So you have, as the model shows, you have to maximize the asset worth, you have increase in the net cash flows, a reduction in the risk, and the increased net cash flow further leads to increased revenues and decreases cost, because also the value of your investment is going up. And the risk with the increased number of products, that means product diversification, you have a risk which reduces, and the risk reduction is also with in combination with investment, which where the returns are influenced by different kind of environments, geographical diversification and others. So even though it's a risky, a company can maximize the worth of an asset by either increasing the cash flow, increasing revenue, or decreasing cost in either way, or decreasing the risk of increasing product and area diversification. So we really have, according to the financial theories, international investment constitutes an attempt to decrease risk by combining investment whose future cash flow, which means future returns or revenues, are influenced by different environmental factors. Factors like social, technological, ecological, political, and economic trends. This is a constant that one is looking at. So it's a pure gains theory, that where you have more gain, you're investing, and that's the reason that MNC's decision to invest abroad really gets manifested. Then, of course, you have the next one, which is a life cycle theory, where unlike the financial theories, the product life cycle theories focus on direct foreign investment. And these theories consider, such investments as bona fide, where management strategy aims at overcoming market saturation, along with product maturation, that means a product's loss of a market, and customer appeal, which takes place. So unlike the financial theories, here there's a life cycle that they're looking at, that till a certain point they will actually make hay while the sun is shining. So it depicts a kind of a typical product development process in a lot of ways. And we have, a whole lot of phases in which it goes through. But if we put it down to 4 phases that the life cycle theory really puts it, you have the first of the 4 phases is, of course, the pioneering or the introductory stage, which is characterized by high but not declining price. So per unit, ratio. So it is high price, but it's not huge profit, but it's not declining. Exponential, this pioneering stage has exponential increase in sales. The pioneering stage also has substantial losses because of absence of, huge profits that take place. But because it's the pioneering stage, they're waiting for the next stage of the life cycle. The MNCs are ready to take that risk because they anticipate, or rather they envisage, expansion and growth. And the expansion and growth is characterized by a smooth decline in the prices per unit ratio, a smooth increase in the sales, along with profits, or rather the absence of losses. And then, of course, you have the stabilization, maturation phase, where, the characteristic feature of this is essentially slightly increased price per unit ratio from the expansion growth stage, a leveling increase in the sales, and declining profits. So that also happens, but per unit, at the macro level, it's a win-win situation. At the micro level, you might see certain changes like declining profits, but that is something that they're prepared for. Then you have the life cycle theory talks about the decline, which is characterized by increasing price per unit ratio. It's also characterized by decreasing sales and declining profits. So that's when, they decide, okay, we are going to move out from these kind of perspectives. And finally, you have the market imperfection theories, where really, the proponents of the monopolistic advantage theory claim that, like a firm in the course of its evolution in the home market, acquires certain capabilities and captures a substantial market share there. The firm then uses these capabilities really to secure a leading position in the industry. This position enables the firm, the multinational firm, to produce and market certain products and market certain products very quickly, very swiftly, thus depriving the other firms of the opportunity to enter the market, to control the availability of existing raw material or the development of new substitutes, and to attract and kind of retain superior managerial and employee talent in the production process, finance, and market. So you've got the trust of the people, and the market it's using the market imperfections to its profit. The monopolistic advantage theories also states, in a sense, that once the firm has established itself in the home market, it can further exploit the same monopolistic or oligopolistic advantage by reaching out to the world market in that sense. So this way, the production advantage that are due to superior research and development, superior R&D, product and process technology can be prolonged incessantly, bringing kind of additional revenues into the company. So this theory really is the internalization theory, which is intra-firm kind of transactions, asserts that the external market, are not very efficient. Thus, it's difficult for any unaffiliated firm to recover its developmental and marketing costs and eventually reap a fair kind of benefit in that fair return on that investment. It is for this reason that the firm creates its own market by developing a network of subsidiaries that buy and sell to each other. So you're actually creating that whole edifice to manufacture a need for it, and in a lot of ways. So they're practically manufacturing that, and to buy and sell to each other, minimizing the transaction costs. In addition, these intra-firm kind of transactions between an MNC and its worldwide subsidiaries, among the MNCs, it's easier for them to administer it because market identification and servicing is performed by the local firms, which act as members of the same family rather than competitors. So you have bought off your competitors or bought your competitors now who are actually working for you. Another advantage, of course, of this is that it provides a safe and sure way of maintaining control of certain knowledge intensive or high technology, kind of processes in a lot of ways. The idea here is that in selling via the open market, as opposed to a captive market, a firm risks actually use of unfair risk it has, use of its hard-earned technological advantage by firms that use the product or the process. So most high technology firms in, say, the electronic or the pharmaceutical industries make considerable use of internalization as a strategy for going international. So, you look inward to go outward, and you use this whole notion of market imperfection. But having said that, the larger from looking at it from the top, from a macro perspective, on one hand, financial globalization exemplifies the health and the beneficial triumph of global capitalism, definitely. On the other side, of course, is a critique of it, where the international financial system, it is felt, is out of control and it desperately needs to be regulated. Here, I want to mention Michael Sandel. I don't know if, I'm sure you've looked at his concept of justice and others, or What Money Can't Buy. And of course, he has a later book, which I'm going to share with you, which came out last year. And basically, Sandel speaks about a society where, everything can be bought and be sold. So he's really considering that. He says that, isn't there something wrong with a world in which everything is for sale? And if so, how can I'm getting Sandel in to introduce certain, thinking and recent thinking into whether it's market perfection or market imperfection. But here it's questioning the whole notion of the market itself, that if it is so, if there's something wrong in a world in which everything is, for sale, how can we prevent market values for reaching the spheres of life where they don't belong? So basically he's saying, what are the moral limits of the market, essentially? And in recent decades, according to him, the market values have crowded out non-market values. He says, the value concept of a value itself has become monetary. Other values like moral values, honesty, integrity, whatever, has gone out of vogue, according to Sandel. And the non-market values in every arena of life, without quite realizing it, Sandel actually argues that we have, as a species, human beings have drifted from having a market economy, which is what we are speaking about, to being a market society. So think about this, and of course read Sandel when you can. This is not directly related, but we really need to make it interdisciplinary to understand how values become so much of a problematic issue, and values become so monetary only. You don't have any other concept of values. In his work that he has written called Justice, which is an international bestseller, and I'm sure you've looked at that, Sandel actually showed himself to be the master of illuminating with clarity and with a lot of verve the hard moral questions we are confronted with in society, in our everyday lives. In Money, What Money Can't Buy, later what he wrote, he provokes a debate that there's been missing in our market-driven age. What is that? He provokes a debate about there's so many things that are missing in this whole market-driven age that we are in. What is the proper role of the markets in a democratic society? He's questioning it. And how can we protect the moral and the civil goods values that markets do not honor and money cannot buy? So what money can buy is the products which we've created, and we've all become part of this system, which is, marketizing. Have we become commodities in that sense of the term? So very often it is asked whether we are using technology or technology is using us. We've reached a point where we're actually being asked, to clarify whether we are robots by, having certain clues that are given, and you're supposed to prove that. And this is what technology is doing to us in a lot of ways. His newer book, it's interesting. I don't know where I've kept that. Okay, I've actually deleted the link of that, but his newer book is called The Tyranny of Merit. And it's called Populist Discontent, Globalization, Misogyny and Racism. And basically the book is called The Tyranny of Merit. And there again, Sandel picks up, and I will share, I have the book as a PDF, so I'm going to share that. It diagnoses a kind of a populist discontent of globalization, of misogyny, of racism, fundamental flaws of society, because this came out last year. And this, he says, is emanating from a hitherto cherished kind of idea of what is considered merit. The state from a, of a common good is analyzed by re-looking at the moral history of merit, the rhetoric of the rising ethics of success, and the sorting of the human beings. So the meritocratic ideal about mobility and not equality. So he says that seems to have gone. It does not rectify the unimaginable gaps between people's position, but only talks about everyone being given a chance regardless of the kind of prejudice that we have. So this continues to create a tussle between the winners and losers in this whole process where, people are humiliated. So basically Sandel is asking, does merit have a class? He even asked, does merit have a caste? He's taken the example of India here too. And Sandel politically conceptualizes that everyday language of winners and losers, it's only monetary. You're not looking at other values there. He critiques the rhetoric of the rising as projected by political leaders, So empirical data highlights the absolute skewed number of people experiencing upward mobility. The richest 1%, for example, of Americans make more than the bottom half combined together. He exposes the truth that today's meritocracy has hardened into a hereditary aristocracy. So we're really looking at a notion of how that has happened over a period of time. I'm jumping straight on to Washington Consensus, which is significant because we link it with our first few lectures, which is what it led to. And essentially, when we are looking at Washington Consensus, this was in the 80s as part of the prescriptions that were, kind of factored in any kind of loans and advances that were given during the crisis to the developing countries. And these prescriptions, economic policy prescriptions, were considered to be a standard. It was called a package deal, and we did this in our first lecture here. And this standard reform packages were being promoted for crisis-wrecked developing countries by Washington, D.C. based institutions such as IMF, World Bank, US Department of Treasury, etc. And the term was, of course, first used in 1989 by John Williamson. And the kind of prescriptions actually encompassed policies in such areas like macroeconomic stabilization, economic opening with respect to both trade and investment, expansion of the market forces within the domestic economy. Now, as I said, as I already told you earlier, there was a TINA factor. They were not accepted voluntarily. It was something which was constantly, being thrust down our, to be implemented by us. And we didn't have a choice. The developing world didn't have a choice and had to take it up because we had no other means of getting any access to any other loans, because all loans were tied to the IMF and the World Bank kind of package that was built. This was a consensus, what they call a consensus. And the word consensus has been questioned later, and we'll do that the next time on that. And basically, it included 10 broad sets of relatively specific policy recommendations, where you had fiscal policy discipline with avoidance of large fiscal deficits relative to the GDP. So basically, they wanted growth, they wanted profits to see profits. So, and then it meant a redirection of public spending from subsidies, especially indiscriminate subsidies, towards a broad-based kind of pro-growth policies. So pro-poor services like primary education, primary healthcare, infrastructural investment, all this needed to be redirected towards areas which had growth elements in it. It also had, the third element was tax reform, broadening the tax base. It was kind of adopted a moderate marginal tax rates which were brought in. Then you had interest rates that market determined and positive but moderate in real terms. So competitive exchange rates. So all it was doing was rehauling the economies completely in these prescriptions that were introduced. Trade liberalization. So import, liberalization of imports, elimination of restrictions that were there, barriers that were there, like licensing, etc. It opened out any trade protection to be provided by low and relatively, uniform tariffs. So the environment was being created for investments coming in at the cost of, which was not so simply realized at that point, at the cost of the developing world. Liberalization of inward foreign direct investment was another thing that was constantly being, pushed for. So you had privatization of the state enterprise, which was part of these broad set of recommendations. Deregulation, another very problematic area, because you're abolishing regulations that impede the market entry. So you're opening out the market completely, laissez-faire to its core, restricting competition except for those justified on safety. So you were creating your own environment and facilitating your own investment process. And consumer protection grounds were, being built, and a prudential oversight of the financial institutions. This also gave legal security for property rights. I mean, this was something which was built on it. Based on this, and this, as we can see, this is in the 1980s where the consensus was developed. And based on this, you had the whole notion of what was later economic liberalization being introduced in various ways, where you had, of course, the short-term measures, which was stabilization measures in terms of balance of payments, in terms of using fiscal and monetary restraint, along with exchange rate devaluation, and to move to an exchange rate which reflected like a relative scarcity of foreign and domestic kind of currency. These were short-term stabilization measures, along with, more significantly, the structural adjustment programs, which is something that in that whole political economy syndrome, when we are looking at it, it's market liberalization to the core. And these are long-term measures. These are designed as conditionalities for the countries wishing to borrow from the international financial institution, and which of course is the IMF and World Bank. And we have a notion of how this market liberalization has a range of elements within it, from an extensive range of sectoral measures designed to improve the supply side condition. They were trying to justify why they are bringing this in, and why it was a standard package for every country which was seeking the loan, which was problematic. And they defended it to say that the idea being that you're all running on deficit, and first we needed to see profitability there. So the idea was to make the domestic prices correspond to the shadow prices as well, including widespread deregulation of product and factor markets. So all these were ways in which the privatization of the state enterprises was taking place in a big way. Public sector resource mobilization was something which, they sought. Institutional reform, which is a very, very problematic area of the structural adjustment programs. Institutional reform, especially of the government and the public sector. So the whole nature of the globalization, the way it was being, nature of economic liberalization, with a lot of the Washington consensus prescriptions being drawn in, was looking at global governance from that, And here the context of global governance, of course, was the international financial institutions and the donor conditionality. And that conditionality came with strings attached. And the strings attached, as we already told you, were the two basic measures, stabilization and structural adjustment measures, which were very, very detrimental to the countries where it was being done. But the countries didn't have a choice. And after a point, it's interesting, the countries took ownership of it when it started showing success, because if you don't have the resources, you can do little else. After that, it was actually being projected as, in India, for instance, as Swadeshi policies, like it's our own policies, whereas they weren't, because the idea was that you had to hard sell it if you needed to show results. So globalization has simultaneously led to liberalization and privatization. And this, of course, has meant a whole, so which means that besides being globalized, the economies of the world are being simultaneously liberalized. And that was what the consensus, Washington consensus, was kind of, egging us on towards. They are simultaneously being liberalized. This makes, the economy more profitable for business, which was the idea here. And you're making the economy more profitable for business by adopting a strategic retreat of the state. So the state is retreating in favor of the public sector or the private business, Again, very, very significant part of the implications in terms of operational dimensions of this was public administration, the role of public administration. The state withdrawal implied a paradoxical need for more complex tasks to be performed by public administration, because what was within the domain of public administration was taken over because it was supposedly non-profitable. Here it was called bloated bureaucracy, corruption, nepotism, all this was endemic. So the kind of new tasks that public administration had to perform, it got reduced and it got increased in other ways. It now had to regulate and support private communities, NGOs, international agencies, etc., the public administration, which, you know, its own task was so different, and now it became completely different terrain that we were looking at. This, of course, needless to say, was technically difficult. It was not an easy kind of a role that was to be paid, and difficult, and this was difficult to accommodate together with the kind of established styles of administration. That means you had to admit that you had not performed well, and a lot of alternatives came in, increased with global governance, the way it evolved. So the response to the public expenditure cuts in the funding of essential services at one level has been the incremental development of individual and community kind of alternatives. So NGOs, voluntary organizations, a lot of other organizations. At another level, within this framework of planned adjustment, which is what is the package which is being offered to us, which it's been 30 years now, within this framework of adjustment, user charges for public services have come in for everything. And what was public earlier, like the airlines, even the trains are becoming, I don't know, Indonesia, you can tell me more on that. Roadways, buses, you know, transport system, increasingly privatized. So you're charging user fee for the services that are being given. And this has been introduced. This has, in some senses, raised the services, which were, you know, earlier the public sector. The private sector has increased that, but then you have alternatives that are there, which need affordability. So you have fancy hospitals which have come in here, which are really health tourism, as it's called, because only some can afford it. It's not as if you have access to it and it's meant that change. But the most significant part of this rules of global governance is in the kind of institutional reforms that have come in, which is cuts and demoralization in the public administration, naturally, in the way the system is working institutionally. The programs for the reduction of employment and of the public administration is there, retrenchment taking place. Reductions are seen as the best way of reducing the public expenditure, because it's felt that overstaffing is a problem. Disguised unemployment is a problem. All these are issues which come up. This is undermining the government's conventional role as the, you know, provider, you know, as an employer in exchange for political support. You know, government was providing so many things, and that's why you're asking for votes. This has undermined that. So your vote bank is slowly getting lost here. And the effectiveness in restraining the civil service expansion seems to have been greater in more ideologically committed countries, say of Latin America and independent ones of Africa than elsewhere, because they have completely had to do away with ideology. Then, of course, you have the notion of good governance, which is intended to, you know, kind of improve the effectiveness of the adjustment policies. In one-party states of Africa and Latin America, it was translated as a political conditionality of multi-party politics as well. And basically, the objective here was legitimate and effective opposition would force the recalcitrant governments to implement economic reform. So they were making us use the resources so much more, create political parties, and a lot of parties. I've worked in Tanzania, and they virtually in Tanzania, and I've worked in politics of liberalization there. In Tanzania, you had this Ujamaa kind of socialist system there, and one party which had intra-party democracy, and with liberalization, they practically just divided that same party into different parties to satisfy the dictate of having multi-party democracy, which meant resources getting diversified. but this was seen as an objective. And a democratically, elected government would be better able to, according to them, it would be better able to gain acceptability for the reform process of the civil society, without realizing the fact that even intra-party democracy could have been, democratically elected. So good governance took another form of, that whole idea of, what are the facets of good governance, accountability, transparency, responsiveness. This is sold to us. Effective and efficient kind of system, rule of law, participative system, consensus oriented, insulated from politics. These were all, I mean, in theory or on paper, it couldn't really happen and translate in that way. So the context of the reform process and the international financial institutions and donor conditionality, complete with the MNCs and TNCs, which had been existing earlier and now use this to their advantage. The government came under multiple pressures to undertake contradictory reforms, especially in established administrative arrangements. So the World Bank's and IFI's kind of assumption that reforms, when they are applied to the developing countries, has been that economic growth would be resumed by a contraction of the state activity, and the development of a liberalized market is something which, they were trying to hard push that agenda. And it's questionable whether that's happened or not. I mean, it's easy for us to be critical of, liberalization, but the fact remains that it has changed the complexion. Ideological, definitely, but even economic. So in many senses, this has provided, and we'll do this the next time when we do international financial institutions, has provided a framework within which other donor agencies also operate. And the next time I also want to do how this whole economy is not gender neutral. And this, I can't go away without doing something on the gender imbalance in which, the economy also relies on a gender imbalance, and how, the full potential of women is not used completely in a lot of ways. So this is meant, as we are constantly saying, the triad of balancing the three strengths of state, civil society, and the market. Having said that, the implications of this have been increased global interconnectedness. Global policy making has, it's so interconnected. It has meant a decrease in the policy instruments available to the state, to the nation state, to control activities within and beyond its borders. And international forms of collaboration with, have had political integration with other states thrown in there as well. This has become, today the basis of global governance that, we are, speaking about. And so I'm going to continue with that. And of course, the next time we are going to do parts of, and I should put here the gender notion as well, implications of the Washington Consensus, going on to the financial institutions, and the crucial role of GATT and WTO, especially with a focus on labor and environment, because whilst we are talking about economic growth, we are also talking about sustainable development, which entails natural resources and environmental kind of equity that we are talking about. So thank you all.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor, for your very insightful lecture. Hence, now we're going to begin the discussion. For those who have several questions, feel free to raise your hand or write on the chat box. It's okay whether it's written in English or in Bahasa. Anyone want to ask a question?
So Renata, Dana, you can also look at the questions and read them out.
Yeah.
I'll soon learn Indonesian, but I don't know that.
Yeah, okay, Professor. Anyone want to ask?
Anyone wants to make a comment?
Yeah.
You have any experience that you want to share of your own country so that, we can equate that, would also be useful. You've had a lecture from the professor from within, right? The last time, Habibi?
Yes, ma'am. Yesterday we have
Day before yesterday, yeah. So he would have done. So can you compare any examples and can you kind of equate that? Tell us as well.
Yesterday we have a lecture from Dr. Muhammad Koyum. He gives us a meaningful insight on global political economy, how Indonesia's role in global political economy. In his presentations, he said to me, I saw him this morning when I visited to his house. He said that I cannot say that Indonesia has some key role in the global political economy. He said that Indonesia is only a participant. It's only a participant in global political economy because there are no meaningful inclusion of Indonesia in global political economy because we are only becoming the place of export. I mean, there are so many products from abroad, from foreign countries to Indonesia. Meanwhile, we have less product to be exported to another countries. Like, for example, from India, we have many products from India, like, for example, Bajaj, and Suzuki also made from India, like Suzuki Ertiga, Toyota from Europe, Toyota from Japan, and from China. There are many automotive cars there.
So what you're saying is that your consumers rather than and participants as consumers rather than actually part of the manufacturing and the intervention.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is so? Is it the low negotiating powers or is it pure economic growth? Lack of it?
Because Dr. Muhammad Koyum said, in comparing between periods of Indonesia, I was asking for his PPT and he said he would like to say to me, he compares between regime during he compares between regime during the era of Sukarno. Sukarno was doing nationalization of Dutch companies. Like, for example, Shell was being nationalized as Indonesia Petroleum Companies.
Okay.
And after that, during the Suharto era, after Sukarno, we are becoming the place of liberalization. It means that foreign funds from United States are coming from US. Suharto opened so many foreign direct investment in 1970 to Indonesia. And after that, during the 2010, we are beginning to speak about the role of Indonesia in ASEAN. Right. But it is becoming a failure because Indonesia has no certain rules apart from Indonesia is only a raw product production. A raw product producer.
Raw material producer.
Yeah, raw material producer.
Habibi, and why don't you let them see any comparisons that they can see and fit Indonesia in the picture? So maybe you can take that exercise up in class, in what way it's coming. But what do you feel is the reason for, after so many years, you're still in a state of being a consumer, as a consumer market?
What do we feel?
No. What went wrong?
What went wrong? I cannot tell you, ma'am, but it's the behavior of politicians of Indonesia. In
Yeah.
Indonesia, maybe the politicians do not have a big sense of nationalism. Like
Yeah.
in India, we have Gandhi. He introduced the notion of Swadesi movement and nationalist economy of Gandhian economy. But in Indonesia, we are lack of figures who continue the work of Sukarno in nationalizing the Dutch economies. Now, I mean that after Sukarno, there are no presidents of Indonesia who have courage to fight against foreign direct investment in Indonesia.
Do you think the NAM, the non-aligned movement, has, not benefited in that sense, Indonesia in some senses? Because
Non-aligned movement,
our association was because of Sukarno and part of NAM for India.
Yeah, it was initiated by Sukarno and Nehru in Indonesia in the Bandung Conference. But after we are shifting the presidency to Suharto, it was a total shift from our trade policy, from being a nationalist one.
The reason I brought that up is you are speaking very, in a very moralistic and eulogizing way about Mahatma Gandhi. Believe me, the common Indian does not see it in that light. And today we've reached a point of despite non-alignment, we align despite all our concept of non-violence. We have taken the step of, say buying, and this is something I'm going to do in the last lecture also, and that's a comparative we should bring in here, dealing with Russia simultaneously with Ukraine and with aplomb and without being defensive about it, because let's face it, when it comes to power dynamic, who cares about non-alignment? Who cares about whether you've been non-violent? America might sit on judgment and be the big brother and tell us that, your human rights record is not good, but their Black Lives Matter continues, So all this element of the power dynamic is whoever controls and whoever gains would, it would work. So I think, leadership aside, the times are such that unless it's, you have losers and gainers, unless the bulk of the people are gainers, it's not going to help. So we have perspective here, which the present government is taking because it has the support of the majority in a lot of ways. So it's able to do, and some very questionable measures, despite having secularism in our constitution as well. But it's managing to do that because there's that support. So somewhere along the line, if you can create, if a niche market can be created of even ideas, and that's why I got Sandel in, and I wanted you, I don't know if you've looked at Sandel at all, Habibi. Yeah, have you? I'm going to share that book with you. I do want you folks to see it from a pure monetary, beyond the pure monetary perspective, to values. And really, you can't buy these values in the market. Market can only sell so much, thus far and no further. So,
So I mean that in our nation, the perspective of the leaders today, they are enjoying to be the raw materials producing countries. Like, for example, crude palm oil, we are the largest exporter of crude palm oil to India. And then in the Suharto era, we are becoming the members of OPEC, or petroleum exporting countries. And after the raw material is shifting to another raw materials, I mean that we have so many natural resources that always come up within many periods. Previously, in the past, we are the exporters of oils, and today we are the largest exporters of crude palm oil. I mean, the leaders of our nation is enjoying themselves as becoming the producer of raw materials. I think it's a common sense in Indonesia that our leaders is and if you see in India, you will not find any cars automotive from Indonesia. There is no. Meanwhile, in Indonesia, we can find Suzuki Ertiga. It is produced in India, and then we can find also Royal Enfield also is sell here, and then many Indian products are which is high quality and modernized products. They are sold here, but in Indonesia itself, it's enjoying the status of raw materials producing countries.
Yeah. Yeah. I've put a thing in the chat that there are no questions, comments. Is it because it just went over your head, you didn't understand it, or you're absorbing it? And maybe I should send you the handouts for this as well. And though you're recording it, right?
Yeah, we are recording it. Actually, ma'am, maybe they are the students right now is in the last days of their semesters. They have so many assignments. They have so many works to do. They are doing it from home, and sometimes they are not in official costume, so they are maybe shy and
Yeah, no, that's okay. Do you know that we have, like, I'm taking online classes, but the second semester, the final semesters are offline. We had our exam scheduled yesterday and, sorry, day before yesterday. And the students have just come and said they want online exam. They want offline classes, but they want online exam and they refuse to sit down. And now they'll probably lose a year because the vice chancellor is not allowing it. And these are our political science students. And there's no reasoning behind that. You've come for the exam and 2-3 people who took it, now it's going to go on. But these are times in which, you know, a lot of things have changed. And I think the students, especially in Jamia, you weren't here in these turbulent times. It's been a lot
when
of
online exam we can open the books, ma'am.
Yeah, but the irony is they want offline classes. They want to come and, you know, meet their friends, come to the department, do
Yes,
all that.
ma'am.
But exams they want to take online. I mean, it's clear why you want to do it. It's really sad, and they'll probably lose a year now. I mean, at the rate that we are.
Okay, maybe Ranata Dana would like to ask a question.
Yes. Maybe for the other students, maybe this will start a discussion. I'm very interested in the foreign direct investment that you told earlier, and I thought to myself, and I think it's kind of simple question, but is foreign direct investment could be a new form of neoliberalism? Because I've read recent cases in Sri Lanka that their economy collapsed because they have a lot of debt.
FDIs.
Yeah, they have a lot of debt, and most of it is because of the Chinese foreign direct investment, and because of that they cannot pay, and now they have to suffer, and many of their how do I say it, main of their like docks and roadways are given to China for the payment. So is FDI a new form of neoliberalism, or it could be controlled?
It's actually not new. FDI is, when I was doing MNCs, I was doing FDI, and MNCs are not a new concept. So we are building on from multinational and transnational corporations, which started with, as I told you, the 3 stages that were there. It started with trade, international trade that took place, followed by portfolio investment, where one company's, physical corporate assets of one company for capital investment, capital assets otherwise. And the final stage of, in fact, the growth of international business was foreign direct investment. But the nature, what you're right about is the nature. And that's why you have economies are further going to collapse unless they take hold. And I'm concerned about Indonesia, the way things are, because unless the manufacturing, unless you're reaping the benefits of what you're actually sowing is going to happen, it's going to be another disaster. So we're looking at FDI as the third stage. After international trade, you move on to portfolio investment. And this third stage, which involves acquisition of an entire company or the establishment of productive facilities owned and managed by the multinational corporation with economic interests in more than one country. So the fluctuation elsewhere is going to be problematic any which way. And in the times that we are, if, as Habibi was speaking about, lack of investment beyond the raw material production and being a consumer in Indonesia, if that continues, then your FDI is going to put you lower and lower in any which way, because they don't care whether you're getting there. They're coming to your country. I mean, it's something which is, happening constantly. And the whole package of the structural adjustment package actually is they want profit, in the sense that Sandel is questioning those kind of profits that Michael Sandel is questioning. The value is purely monetary value. What it is doing to the other facets, we are not even, thinking about at this point in time. And what it's done, because it's a irreversible change, this whole culture of malls, this whole acquisitive culture that's come in. So FDI as a policy, I don't know, neoliberal or not, in that sense of the term, it's been something which has been there for some time. It's definitely intrusive. It's definitely a new form of neo-colonial, if you like, in the way it is operating today. So yes, I'd agree in a lot of ways that, and it's not only FDI, under the garb of FDI, you have so much else happening, because then you are actually coming in the whole problematic of the, the stage of international growth of businesses, that they are coming and getting property rights in your country and operating out of here. It's not as if they're outside and, you can de-link. Now and soon there'll be other clauses that might come in, and issues and concerns might come in terms of management, in terms of ownership, in terms of standardization of certain things. But having said that, it's also creating employment opportunities. When you talk about the MNCs coming in here, if we can capitalize on that enough, and it's only creating that, it's like the business processing outsourcing, the outsourcing that's been happening. And in countries like ours, it's being used as, little educated 10th, 12th, the O-level kind of students are being taught accents, American accents and the British accents. And so that they are going to be actually selling commodities in where they are because it's cheaper. So that labor intensive nature of these needs to be, looked at. That it's not going to lead to, it's not benefiting. It's a pure win-win situation for the international business. I'm not sure it's the equal amount is coming in to the local countries where they're investing in that sense of the term, because they're doing it for their benefit. And, the whole, and why they are doing it, why do they invest abroad, is because they want this foreign direct investment stuff. It meets the need for, a lot of their needs. It meets their strategy to diversify. They're learning from the locals because they're employing the locals. They get a, what I said was a better feel of the market. And all of that means that it's a win-win situation for them. If we can capitalize on that, and actually, it can become reverse as well in a lot of other ways. We use that in terms of understanding the transfer of technology that is taking place, which we can, if we can do, that would be useful. And India has done that to a large limit. I don't think Indonesia has reached that point of, optimizing on it. India has, because we've thrown off and, it's coming back in here. But of course, this kind of development, and I'm talking about pure development in terms of pure economic growth and profitability, has meant a definite, the barriers between the rich and poor growing much more. So you are getting the benefits, but the benefits are only to the upper echelons, happening in a big way. And as long as it's coming into the country, the political leadership doesn't care. A lot of the welfare status policies have had to take a back seat. You don't have investment in that. And now you have investment in that also. Education, when it's happening, they're doing partial here and partial there and stuff like that. Health, for instance, all these are investments that are happening on quarters, on different quarters. You can see the vaccine diplomacy with COVID, and directly. And the fact that we were actually manufacturing made a lot of difference to, why this was something which was so crucial for us, because we would have been in a soup otherwise in a lot of ways. Of course, I don't know about the validity of the vaccine itself. People having taken the vaccine, having taken the booster dose, are still getting COVID. But having said that, I think there's only so far that we know. The kind of experimentation in science and technology that is happening, it's monitored by who's supporting it. So you wouldn't have pharmaceutical industries based on that as well. So it's a worrisome situation. But yes, of course, it is something which, after a point we need to take control. Otherwise, the FDI is going to be not just direct investment, it's going to be foreigners becoming, taking over. So yes, it's something that we need to look at. So good comment, Ratna. And yeah.
Thank you, Professor, for the answer.
I think many students do not understand between the difference between portfolio and FDI because they are not economic students.
Yeah.
And
portfolio investment, yeah. It's like a single company, but that's not an important kind of a differentiation. I did that for you because, it's not important for you to know, to be studying this. I did this because I wanted to show you how it has developed from pure international trade to portfolio investment. Portfolio investment is really a partial exchange of physical corporate assets of one company for the capital assets of another. And this portfolio investment is not, it doesn't, it's not in the local country. It's with FDI, that stage, the third stage, it's with foreign direct investment that the acquisition of the entire company happens, or the establishment of, the productive facilities and others. So portfolio investment is, capital assets at one level only. So it's a stage before that in the international business growth. So that's all you need to know. You don't need to know the nuances of how that portfolio, because there are ups and downs because of the rise of the share costs and, bears and bulls and stuff like that, which we don't really need to get into, because we are first talking about at the global level. We are not talking about individual investments in that sense of the term. So yes, and I tried to make it as non-technical as possible, as much as I could. But there are certain terms, so just understand the simple meaning instead of, getting into it, because it will just complexify the situation more. Yeah.
And I would like to comment that Indian successful to manage FDI and portfolio. Maybe it is because the role of Indian person of Indian origin and non-resident India.
Yeah.
And many Indians who are in America, in US, in UK, and in Australia, in Europe, they are coming to India and they open foreign companies and they start doing business in India. And after that, it helps the Indian economy. Maybe this stage.
So what this government has done is it's eased that process for people of Indian origin. In fact, there's a people of Indian origin citizenship they are giving in different ways. So it has eased, and ease of business is something that at least the Modi government has been propagating and doing in a big way. And, that whole notion of that unless that is successful, that we won't do. So yes, you're right about that. And a lot of his push in terms of not his vote bank, because they can't vote, but the resources of the party come from there directly. And huge amount of funds, which the Bharatiya Janata Party gets, thanks to the support of who you're calling the PIOs, the NRIs and others. So it's a political win-win for him.
But in Indonesia, when you see the political leaders, how they act, and the people of Indonesia are very resistant to foreign money.
Okay.
And we are considering that the foreign money is haram money. And that makes in some way we want to develop the economy from ourselves. It's like if we want to make car, we have to produce it by our funds, and we don't need like certain technologies abroad who being brought here. In some way, it is an Islamic economy. The Indonesian people, who are majority of Islam, they have certain feelings that the foreign money from US, from China, and from other countries apart from Saudi Arabia, it's haram.
I want to comment on that. I find that a bit ironic.
And it is produced by political parties, and it makes them.
I can see that Nana wants to say something. He's cracking up. Like I am.
And what we are experiencing today in Indonesia.
Between money and money because of the source that it comes from.
What we are experiencing in Indonesia today is the continuation of Dutch East Indies. Dutch East Indies, it's Verenigde of Indische Company. It's VOC. It is one of East India Company, which is from Holland, Dutch. And when you see in the past, there are two East India Company. The first is British East India, which is their base is in India. East India Company it's from British, and in Indonesia itself, the majority is East India Company from Dutch. So what we are experiencing today, our national economy is being supported by these companies, which are former Dutch companies, like perusahaan perkebunan. We are producing coffee, crude palm oil, so many things we are exporting abroad, but not to Europe, mainly to China and India. And
I just want to add that how like you're saying that it's an extension, you had countries in, for instance, Ghana, uh, which was known because Cadbury was such a big kind of multinational corporation, and the crazy amount of cocoa production comes from Ghana. It was actually called a Cadbury economy. I mean, that's how strong the multinational corporations were. So your FDI and another Dana to kind of substantiate that point, in the way that it works, could be taking over economies if they are single ones. If you're talking about crude palm oil, maybe that could be something which would be taken over, in a sense that your whole if it's single or if it's not a few crops economies. So the way that it works can be devastating in a lot of ways. So I didn't realize that the Dutch influence is still there, in a big way in Indonesia, is it?
Yes. Yes.
And
Many
how regional are they?
Dutch companies are being nationalized by Indonesia.
Okay. So do you have a what is it? What, your thing says docent politique. What does that mean?
It's docent
Doctor
is
in
from
politics?
docent
No.
is from Bahasa Belanda. Dutch language. It's lecture.
Oh, okay. So it's not your
Docent
name
is
in
lecture.
any other way. Okay,
Political lecture.
okay, fine. No, I was just wondering whether that's part of your name that I don't know. Okay, Nathandana, would now we'll do a thank you and wind up.
Okay, if there's no more question or comments, first of all, I want to remind the participant to fill out the presentation. Oh, no presentation. The attendance form. To fill out the attendance form below on the chat. And to wrap this up, this is the end of our agenda. Thank you so much, Professor, for giving us such a powerful insight. And thank you all for the participant for participating in this event. To close out today's agenda, allow me to say a quote from Zbigniew Brzezinski. Quote, "We cannot leap into world government through one quick step. The precondition for eventual and genuine globalization is progressive regionalization, because by that we move towards larger, more stable, more cooperative units." End quote. And lastly, I'm Ranata Dana signing out as today's MC on behalf of the committee. Please accept our apology if there's any inconvenience during the event. Once again, thank you and may you have a great day. See you at the next event. Thank you, Professor.
Namaskar. Thank you, Nathandana. Habibi, all the best.
Yes, ma'am.